As I stepped onto the wooden dock at the edge of the summertime lake, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The air was thick and heavy with humidity, and despite the bright sun overhead, I felt a chilling sensation travel down my spine. It wasn't long before I realized that my intuition was correct, and that something sinister was lurking just below the surface. As a lifelong lover of the outdoors, I had always enjoyed spending time near bodies of water, and this lake in particular had been a favorite spot of mine since childhood. But on this day, as I gazed out across the glassy expanse, I felt a creeping sense of dread worming its way into my thoughts. The water was still, too still. There was no sound save the gentle whispers of the wind, and I realized that no birds or insects could be heard, which was unusual for a summer afternoon in the countryside. Gradually, I became aware of a faint smell, something sickly sweet, yet pungent and fishy at the same time. At first, I assumed it must be some kind of algae bloom, but then my eyes fell upon something floating just beneath the surface. My heart began to race as I realized what I was seeing. A monstrous body, bloated and decaying, with rotting flesh and empty eye sockets. I staggered backward, still unable to take my eyes off the horrific sight before me. I knew I needed to get away, but I also knew I needed to find out what had happened and what might still be down there. Slowly, cautiously, I began to edge around the dock, scanning the water for any signs of movement. Suddenly, I heard a high-pitched shriek, the sound of something alive and in distress. It was coming from farther out in the lake, and without even thinking, I took a deep breath and dove in. The cold hit me like a punch in the gut, and my first instinct was to swim back up to the surface for air. But then I heard the sound again, clearer this time, and I realized that it was the cry of a child. Kicking hard, I propelled myself farther into the murky depths, feeling unseen. As I swam through the dark water, I couldn't help but feel that whatever was down there with me was watching, waiting for its chance to strike. My lungs were burning as I groped blindly through the depths, following the sound of the child's cries. Finally, my fingers closed around something soft and fleshy. It was an arm, and it belonged to a small, pale girl, barely visible through the murky water. I hefted her up with all my strength, struggling to keep us both afloat, and swam back toward the dock. The girl was coughing and sputtering, and when we finally made it to land, she collapsed in a heap. Her parents rushed over, tears streaming down their faces, thanking me for saving their daughter's life. As the girl was whisked away to the hospital, I found myself still shaking with adrenaline and fear. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth about what had happened at the lake that day. A local man, a recluse who lived in the woods nearby, had become increasingly unhinged in recent years. When I found the bloated, rotting body in the water, it was that of his own daughter, whom he had murdered in a fit of rage. The man himself was nowhere to be found, but there were rumors that he still roamed the area, haunting anyone who dared venture too close. I never went back to that lake again, haunted by the memory of what I'd seen and the thought of what might still be lurking just below the surface. To this day, I shudder at the thought of summertime lakes and the secrets they may hold. It was an excruciatingly hot summer, the kind where the sun refuses to relent, and even the breeze felt like hot air. My family always takes a yearly vacation to our cabin near the lake, where the fresh water beckons and the trees rustle serenely. This year, our trip was no different, save a few extra odds and ends that needed to be packed. Extra sunscreen, ice packs, and hats, to name a few. The canopy of trees overhead undoubtedly saved me from blistering under the predatory sun, providing a soothing, filtered shade as I gazed out over the lake. I should mention that I've been visiting this lake for most of my life, and I've never encountered any significant problems. In my naive mind, I viewed the lake as a sort of personal anecdote, always giving me safety and peace whenever I needed it. The lake is vast, spanning a wide area surrounded with boulders that hint at the possibility of menacing rocks underfoot. Swaths of reeds are anchored in the ebb of the waves, flanked by groves of trees bunched up cross-necked, as if to chit-chat over something we will never know. One evening, midway through our vacation, I decided to take a boat out for a casual row. My family decided to stay back at the cabin, preferring the comfort of the AC to the outdoors. I pushed myself off the dock and rowed clockwise, going around in a full circle. The blue-green plane of the lake was clear, and the white, just strong enough strokes of my oars broke silence to create auditory perfect arcs in the water. The only other sound was that of the leaves rustling in the wind, and an occasional crow cawing from a tree here or there, all of which I found oddly meditative. As the sun set, I began making my way back to the cabin. The water continued to be smooth under my rowboat, and the sky was luscious shades of pink and indigo as the sun slowly but beautifully disappeared behind the mountains. As I started rowing faster, I heard a soft thud from the boat stem. The oars kept matched pace, but I paused, listening. It took me only a second to realize that I wasn't alone out here. I swiveled my head around to look behind me, but there was nothing to be seen except the mirror-like ridges of the water. I shrugged it off and kept rowing, in an attempt to get back to the cabin as soon as possible. But then, I heard it again, this time louder and more definite. The sound that came from the stern of the boat made my hair stand on end. It was the sound of something scraping against the boat. Petrified with fear, I began to row in a frenzy. The sound grew louder and more rhythmic, as if something was trying to climb onto the boat. I rowed with all the strength I had, my legs and arms pushing rhythmically, even as my heart pleaded for me to speed it up. A wave of relief flooded through me as I finally made it back to the dock. I scrambled out of the boat to see if there was anything there, and that's when I saw it. A black, creeping creature with eyes like two tiny cutouts was staring back at me from the surface of the lake. I froze for what seemed like minutes, then bolted back to the cabin, barely aware of the fact that I was still holding the oars. I burst into the door of my family's cabin and collapsed with the words spilling out of my mouth. "There's something in the lake!" My voice was shaking so much, my entire body felt like it was racked with nerves. My mother tried to comfort me and reminded me that it was probably just a beaver or some other animal living in the lake. But I knew what I saw. That thing had radiated menace and malevolence. I spent the rest of our vacation scanning the shadowy surface of the lake each time we went down to the water, hoping I would never again see that creature. But the sight had scoured and stuck itself in my mind, and that summer our annual trip to the lake didn't have any of the usual peace it was supposed to give. As a child, I spent every summer at my grandparents' lake house. It was a small, cozy cabin situated on the edge of a beautiful, crystal-clear lake, surrounded by towering trees. We would spend our days swimming, fishing, or kayaking in the refreshing waters of the lake. The memories of those idyllic summers will always be etched in my mind. However, there was one summer that changed everything. I was 16 years old, spending another summer at my grandparents' cabin. This particular season was different. It was the hottest summer I could remember, and the lake was a prime destination for tourists. Despite enjoying the company of other people at the park, it was still my favorite place on earth. One night, my friends Jess and Amy had come to stay with me from out of town. Our planned weekend at the lake had gone by so fast that before we knew it, night had fallen. We had taken our kayaks out to the middle of the lake, where we hung out under the stars, giggling and taking silly photos. But the peaceful night was about to be disturbed. As I was admiring the beauty of the lake's reflection of the moon, a splashing noise had caught my attention. I brushed it off, thinking it was merely a fish jumping out of the water. However, the splashing continued, and it sounded like it was coming closer. As we tried to silence ourselves to listen better, the sound of a faint humming came from our right. We exchanged frightened glances, not knowing what to do. We whispered to each other until we heard another splash, this time louder and incredibly close. But when I turned my head, not too far away, I saw that something was moving quickly at the water's surface. Its sheer size terrorized us. The dark shadow seemed to be longer than all 3 kayaks combined. My heart danced erratically within my chest as we sprinted back towards the shore as quickly as we could. The paddling motions were so frantic, with the three of us exchanging words in gibberish. From the corner of my eye, I could tell this creature was intentionally gaining on us, its zigzagged swims preventing as we paddled harder. The creature's movements increased in speed, leaving behind a trail of glistening water. We could feel the waves generated by its movements hitting the kayaks, causing them to bobble clumsily. Just as we thought we were doomed, the creature disappeared beneath the waters with a deafening roar. Trembling with fear and adrenaline, we rushed out of the water and towards the cabin, where we locked ourselves in, refusing to leave until daylight. Our grandparents were stunned to hear our story the next morning, dismissing it as a product of our overactive imagination. However, the next summer, Jess and I returned alone, eager to face our fears and investigate further. We took our kayaks out to the same spot where the creature had chased us the previous summer, hopeful for some answers. As we hung out, the same rhythmic splashing began again, sending chills down our spines. The humming grew louder, and before we knew it, the gigantic creature emerged from beneath the waters at our left, with its jaws wide open. In that single second, we knew for certain that the creature wasn't a mere legend. It was real. The creature's teeth seemed to brim with menacing life, shining brilliantly through the water as it closed in on us. With a swift and determined pace, Jess paddled as fast as she could, exhorting me to keep up. But the creature was swift, pursuing us relentlessly just like the previous summer. Although we found our way back to the shore safely, it was a wake-up call. Our childhood haven forever marred by the encounter, it held after that a promise of terror we weren't ready to cope with again.